Welcome to Grit and Greatness with Kat Peters. I'm excited for today's guest, someone whose no bullshit, matter of fact teachings and philosophies I've always regarded, and someone who is able to get inside the head of the most successful international sporting team in history. I'm talking about fellow Kiwi, the man, the myth, and the legend himself, the New Zealand All Blacks leadership manager, Gilbert Enoka. The All Blacks is a team where the legacy you step into is far more intimidating than any opponent you'll face. Baked into this legacy is a policy Gilbert coined No Dickheads allowed policy, which became a management strategy to build one of the most respected and revered team cultures in the world. With over 15 years with the All Blacks, including back-to-back World Cup victories, and who was made an officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit, we're lucky enough to get into Gilbert's mind and share some of the tools and tactics from inside the All Blacks. Gilbert, thank you so much for joining us here today. Welcome to the show. You've seen it all, the blood, the sweat and tears. You're known as the man who gets inside the All Blacks' head. So how important is the mental game, particularly when it comes to professional sport?
Oh, it's huge, Catherine. I think as time has got on, the value of the role of the brain and its role and performance has grown significantly. This is my 20th privileged year of being with the All Blacks, so I've had a good length of time with them. When I first started back, in the early days around, the late 90s with Wayne Smith and other people, the area of mental skills was sort of considered an ugly duckling. It was considered that if you needed any work in that area that you were weak, that you were soft, and so it was sort of frowned upon as a discipline that could, enhance performance. But nowadays we have a very, very different scenario. People are embracing it because they understand it more. I always use the analogy, if the person wants to improve their strength, they go to the gym and they do 3 sessions a week where they gradually increase the load so their muscles can increase the capacity. If people want to improve their aerobic endurance, they tend to run intervals and do that. So why wouldn't you apply the same philosophy to the mental area? If you want optimal performance, you need physically fit and you need mentally fit, and that has to be a deliberate, systematic structure that people can engage in to grow that particular area.
Yeah, and I think there's been such a growing awareness, as you say, of the mind-body connection. A lot of the time we see great athletes who are just, physically at the top of their game. But for those that really want to, sort of get to the next level, it requires that sort of reshaping of the mindset.
Yeah, like we've learned that no one's immune to pressure. Just because you've been playing sport for a long period of time doesn't mean to say that you will cope with the things that come at you. We've learned that people who you don't think will cope actually do, and people who you do think will cope don't. So it's an ongoing thing that's in a state of flux, and it's like a muscle. It's got to be continually worked on. It's got to be continually looked at, so that people can ensure that when those critical moments arise, that it's there for you in those particular hours of need.
So with the All Blacks, obviously, when people come into the team, you must see a lot of egos. I mean, the All Blacks in itself, we're a warrior culture here down in New Zealand, and there's obviously the pride. There's so much expectation. You've got a whole nation behind you. It's so many young guys' dream to come up and become an All Black. How do you deal with that sort of thing, and how does that play out in building a team culture?
Yeah, well, ego unchecked is probably the most damaging thing for a team culture. When you move into the All Blacks, you move into a culture that has a legacy which is very, very intimidating. They quite often say that the legacy is more intimidating than any opponent you actually play. So understanding that we trumps me, that no one is more important than anyone, that it's more about side by side than it is above and below. A good way of probably explaining it, there was an experiment done by an evolutionary biologist named William Muir several years ago, where he was trying to look at the productivity of teams. And So it's easy. He chose chickens in the study, so it's easy to know whether a chicken's been productive, because the more eggs they lay, the more productive they can be. So what he actually did is he selected an average flock of chickens, and he left this group alone for 6 generations so that they laid eggs. Then he actually took the most productive chickens from that flock and created another group. You could call it a super flock. They're the ones that laid the most eggs. And so he then let these two groups go side by side for 6 generations, and then came back and had a look at them. And he found that the average flock had, they were plump, they had more meat, they were more feathered, the egg production had gone up and increased hugely. And in the super flock, well, there was only 3 left, because they'd pecked each other to death. And that the only way that they could maintain their productivity was to suppress the productivity of those around them. And so when you look at teams and you look at cultures, and there's been many teams that I've come into that are like the super flock. The All Blacks, when I started back in 2000, were like a super flock. When Wayne Smith started with the Crusaders, and I was met with him back in 2000 or 1997 when we started, they were a super flock. And once you understand that successful teams need everybody, and that if you tolerate the super chickens, all you get is dysfunction. You get cultures of secrecy, and so the whole notion of everybody equal and everybody contributing to the cause is a really, really important one.
Yeah, I love that, because I think, particularly in working with so many, high performing teams, cultures can easily become toxic, and all it sort of takes is sometimes just that one person. And one of the things that I love the most, and whenever I talk to people about it, it's just the penny drops. And that's your approach, which is the No Dickheads Allowed policy. Can you firstly explain what a dickhead is, and then what actually the policy is?
Well, a dickhead comes in all shapes and sizes. It is not gender specific. It covers all the faces of diversity. But basically, a dickhead really is people who swim against the team tide. That their own position, their own advancement suppresses the wider advances of the team, and so they're quite often rude, arrogant. They position themselves in places that are very, very challenging for team cultures. Like, I've always believed that culture's not about the way you do things around here, it's why you do things the way you do. And a dickhead quite often has different rationale and reasons for doing that. And we tolerated them for years. We just sort of think they're too talented, one of our best players, we can't get rid of them, and you tolerate behaviours that become inconsistent to the culture. But the moment back, when we first started back with Wayne Smith and others that drove that led the cultures that we're in, and we came to the conclusion that if you can't change the people, change the people. And so when we got to a set of behaviours, and we quite often asked ourselves, is this a development issue or a replacement issue? If it's a development issue for a certain length of time, you can work on it. But as soon as you know it's a replacement issue, you just push that eject button, and you just get the dickheads out. And boy, do you, the release that it gives to people around you within the group is hugely refreshing. I never really knew the power of the message it sends to the rest of the group, and it turbocharged the rest of the group in that context. So, nice Kiwi phrase, dickhead.
Very Kiwi, isn't it?
I think it's pretty well universally understood around the globe. Don't know what it translates in different languages, but dickhead sounds pretty cool.
It's good. It's powerful. I think no one in New Zealand wants to be left with the name or the reference dickhead. So yeah, it's just, I think it sums it all up in one word, actually. You work specifically with All Blacks team, and you've worked with other professional sports teams within New Zealand as well. But you were brought on board specifically to help with a lot of pressure and obviously resilience in the world of professional sports. That's such a critical skill to be able to have. You can't win every game. Have you noticed that it's harder to try and manage resilience when it's, you've got 30 plus people that you've got to actually bring back to the desired mental state? It's hard enough for one person to sort of, have resilience in themselves, but when you've got to bring a whole team back around, particularly after devastating loss, and in 2007 when we lost to France, how do you do that, and what's your focus around resilience?
Yeah, look, it's a great question, Catherine. I think resilience, the starting point's important, and the starting point is the understanding of it. When you understand that resilience is a construct that you don't possess or you don't own, all you can do is exhibit it. So, one day I can get exposed with somebody who says something to me which is offensive or offends in some way, or you get some comments from a coach, and that can just wash over your head because your threshold's very, very high. The next day you can get the same comment in the same situation, and you can just lose it. You get into overwhelm and you just lose control. So once we understand that resilience, it's not like a linear skill where you just the more you do it, the more you actually are capable or own it. So if we say it's variable and it changes from day to day, then we've got to be on top of it, and we've got to do some work on developing the whole area of that particular area. And so I kind of like to use the sort of the metaphor of using the brain as sort of like a battery, and when negative stress sort of builds up, it drains your battery, and so, but when you check your battery charge, you basically, you can choose a recharge strategy in that moment, and by doing that, you can course correct, which prevents that overwhelm. So what we're wanting people to do is we're wanting to say, yep, I've got this capacity, yep, I don't own it, but I know that it has a charge, and if I feel when I do assess it that it's getting low, then I've got to choose a strategy which puts more positive energy into it. And so the different strategies people use are very individual. They're unique to each person. It's better to have a range of things rather than one, but it's certainly, the pandemic, where people are facing uncertainty and unknowns, our sporting landscape's like that, because in rugby in New Zealand, every time we go out and play, the nation expects us to win. We don't win, then we get absolute rubbished by the public, high scrutiny, high expectations, high consequences. So we've sort of positioned ourselves with being able to manage these sort of landscapes. But, it's really a pausing, and it's really an understanding that take each person where they're at and ensure that they've got some recharge strategies so they can keep their threshold high in those times where their cope-ability is tested.
Yeah, obviously work as a team as a whole to build that resilience, and then it's more sort of individual approaches. So are there some overarching tactics that you use as a team?
Yeah, like it's not menu driven. It's not one size fits all. Most often I'm sitting in a room, and when the players come through the door or the coaches, you get a good sense of where they're at. And so once you get a feel, you've got to, you want to actually enable them to not get stuck. So, there's two sort of things competing for control in the world of sport and in life, really. It's the situation you're in, and it's you as an individual. And if situation you're in gets larger than you as an individual and it becomes a burden, then it pushes you into a state of overload and overwhelm. But if you can always sort of see yourself as larger than the situation you're in, then you're in a position of control and influence. So the big question we're always asking our athletes and ourselves is, in terms of that situation, who's exerting the control here? Are you in control of the situation, or was the situation in control of you? And what we don't want is people to get stuck. We want to keep them moving. And the big mantra for us is don't get stuck, keep moving. And sometimes that's a mindset thing. Sometimes it's a physical thing where you've just got to get up and get them moving. Sometimes it's a matter of filling their minds, so you're actually protecting them from getting stuck in circuits of the brain that cause negative feelings and responses. So it's a whole battery of things that are available that you select in the moment that individuals can use to help them navigate their ways through the current situations.
That's actually a really good way of seeing that. And I think with the type A individuals, or highly driven in the professional sports, or if you're an entrepreneur, any type of business leader, it's about those expectations, as you just said, not only whether you have an entire company or a country for that matter, the expectations, it's also the expectations you put on yourself. So how do you sort of create those manageable expectations with the players without it being a complete sense of overwhelm?
Yeah, that's a good question, Catherine. And I think in the early days, up until 2007, where we exited the World Cup in the quarterfinals, the worst result the All Blacks had had in history, that the expectations became a burden. And we when we looked hard and fast at it, it was, we'd succeeded in all international competitions, but the only one that we were stumbling at was Rugby World Cup, and it became a huge burden. The weight of expectations on the players was weighing heavily. And, when you get into that sort of situation, you see things either as a threat or a challenge. We saw it as a threat. It triggered off the fight, flight, freeze response in the brain. And we got stuck and just couldn't perform. So at that particular time, I realised myself that I was part of the problem, and that I didn't have all the skill sets that were required to enable this particular group of men and the women on our management to thrive rather than just survive. So we went back and we looked at pressure. We looked at the way in which the brain responds under pressure. And once we understood that, when you turned and faced it and you leaned into it and you understood that unless you have this pressure, you're not going to be in a place where you can achieve pioneering and wonderful things that this tradition of All Black rugby has been built on, then you go nowhere. So, as I've said earlier, is that there's, the legacy is far more intimidating than any opponent. So nowadays we've changed our mindset around pressure. We want pressure. We want to meet it. We want to face it. We want to reframe it as a challenge. We want to lean into it. And then if we're good enough on the day to win that contest, then so be it. And if we're not and the opponent is better than us, then well done to them. And we buckle up and hook up for another day. But a lot of it was a mindset issue around, us sort of understanding that the expectations of the legacy are far greater than any particular opponent that we'd ever face.
That's great. For all of our listeners as well, the haka is something that's obviously renowned all over the world. Everyone knows the All Blacks from the haka. And I think, even being a New Zealander, it doesn't matter where I am in the world, it sends a shiver down your spine, particularly at a live game, but even, watching it on the big screen. And it almost sort of brings a tear to your eyes as a New Zealander every time they go out and play. How much does that sort of help in, I guess, looking at the mental prep and just before you sort of go out on the field? What's that like? Because at the same token, I know Richie McCaw, his philosophy was also like, if I have to really psych people up minutes before we go onto the field, it's too late. So what's the sort of mental prep just before a game?
I love the haka, I can still walk into a room in our hotel where the boys are practicing the haka, and the hairs on the back of my neck still rise. It's after 20 years. The greater and the more you understand what it's about and where it comes from, the greater the connection to your spirit. So you described how you felt when you see it. It's because it connects with a part of you that ignites really deep inside you something that and releases a feeling which is awesome. So we do a lot of work with Derek Lardelli from the East Coast. He's a kaumātua up there that guides us in our understanding, and he's been terrific in that space. Then if people who do understand the haka, it's not so much about what's happening over there. It's more about what's happening inside here and side by side. So it's about us connecting with our wairua, our spirit, our whānau, our ancestors, and bringing them forward on the day to assist the team in the battle we're about to embrace. We're not a team that is big on rah-rah. You mentioned mental preparation. Like we are strong in the space that it's the individual's responsibility to prepare themselves for an encounter, because in the end, the coaches can't be out on the field making decisions for them. That they have got to been through the scenarios, have developed the skill sets, have to understand what's required to deliver in key moments. And so most of that's left up to them. We'll have a structure that the coaches and the captains will follow, but the content inside that's pretty well left up to the players. And when they pull that jersey on, that armour, that black shield, then they get injected with something very, very special to assist them. And if they've done the work and that they haven't hidden, and if they're not a fraud, when preparation meets the legacy like the All Blacks, then look out. She's a difficult day for most of the opponents.
Wow, absolutely. There's nothing like the All Blacks when they're on point and when they're on fire. There's nothing stopping them. Yeah. Something else to watch, isn't it? So for a lot of people listening today, there's two lots of people. There's those people who sort of just want to, get their shit together and for looking for, sort of practical tools and tips to help them there, realizing that it all starts on the inner game or the mindset. And then there's the people that are wanting to go from the good to the great. So where do people start, I guess, if they haven't really explored doing the inner work and, a lot of the basic mindset tools and things? Where do they start?
It's a good question. It's again, it comes with understanding, because if you don't give the area its degree of respect, then no amount of work will enable you to maximise what can offer. We tend to talk about the three areas that people have got to nail, which are the mindset, the skill set, and the structures. So quite often, if you want to perform well, then you've got to have the attitude to something. So that's around your mindset. So, how you view something and the level of commitment you're going to give to something becomes really important. The skill set's about the tools and techniques that you have to be able to execute something in a given moment. And the structure's all about your rituals and routines. And so once you understand that your skill sets don't work if your mindset's wrong, so you can have all the talent in the world, so that's giving you an idea that I've got to, how much do I know about this? How much can I know about this? You Google this whole area and you'll come up with billions, not millions, it's billions of hits on Google or all of those sort of things. So it's important to understand the keys, and the first one's intent. So I want to get better. If I want to get better, what's the mindset I need to have? If you lock onto that channel and that channel alone, then I think it'll move you in a good direction. And then, if I'm having difficulty executing a skill set, then I can begin to look at what role does the mind play in that particular part of the execution, and what are the obstacles, what are the things getting in my way? Do I need to graduate the exposure to pressure, which is all a combination of the physical and the mental. And so there's many methods, and I wouldn't try and do it alone either. I'd try and get somebody else. Collaboration is such an important part of advancement and moving people in that direction. So, the whole area and the whole mental area, there's a perception in the world that it's easy to sweat, that they think training is just where I go out, I run and exercise and I get covered in sweat and I go, wow, this is awesome. And they don't see, if they're sitting down, they're looking at how they want to control their thinking or the way they act in certain scenarios. People don't see that as training. So as you can see, mindset again comes to the fore. And we reiterate again that if your skill sets don't work, if your mindset's not right.
That's great. Great advice. And I know you talk a lot about being in the present moment, and particularly you and the team did a lot of work around practicing the sort of last 20 minutes, crucial 20 minutes of a game when things aren't working that well for you. How do you maintain clarity? How do you just sort of bring yourself to the present moment without panicking? Because I think it is about making those clear decisions and processing the information of what's happening around you. And I think the same with, business leaders and things on the fly as well. Do you do a lot of mindfulness with the team as well? Or how do you really sort of stay in the present moment?
Yeah, like it's mindfulness is a very, very trendy catchphrase. Hey, don't get me wrong, it's a terrific technique that people can use to still the mind. Like that's, I always say when you're looking to recharge that battery, it's about you either still your mind or fill your mind. It's not so much what I do; it's more what the coaches and the leaders do. By this stage, they've integrated the skill sets in the mental domain into the areas of physical practice, in terms of what they want to do. So they're going through and they're looking at, they're going through different scenarios. And most of the times where people can't get into the present moment is because their attention's somewhere. So they're either thinking about what's happened or they're thinking about what will happen. And so, they get stuck. And so when you do that, then your vision narrows, so you can't see anything about what's immediately in front of you. So what we're aiming to get people to do is to, what are some techniques that they can do to get out of their own head. Most of the time, getting people to perform well is encouraging them to get out of their own way, because they become their own obstacle. So it's not so much a thing that's driven by me. It's more, it's what coaches and leaders out on the field do when what we've got to do is help them recognise it in themselves, one, and two, help to recognise it in their mates, two, and then when they see it is to employ techniques that they can use to get them back into that present moment. And a lot of that is, and most of that is to do with where they place their attention. And then quite often it can be just on their breath. Quite often it can be something external. Quite often it can be a simple act of counting, a simple act of communicating with somebody in the immediate environment. And I don't think it's any different in business, because, you get people that different things happen in business. The boss says something, people do a pitch and it doesn't work and people get stuck. They come back in front of their computer, they spend up, it's devious. You end up spending time on Facebook and surfing, and it's all devious ways of saying that you just want to escape from what you've just been before you actually engage in what's going to come up. So, these sort of things are just as applicable in business as they are on the sports field.
Yeah. Yeah. You've been quoted as saying, you can't be a great player off the field and a prick off it. It's what you actually bring as a whole of person, approach to the team as well. How important is, self-care?
It's huge, to be fair. It's and we've learned that, like through our careers, we felt that, there's a lot of people, I think after 2007 when we lost, they said, I don't care, because Sir Brian Lahore was the one that touted the phrase, better people make better All Blacks. And this is back before 2007. And after we lost in 2007, you had all the old fellas coming out and saying, I don't care what they're like off the field, they can do anything they like as long as they win on it, But we tried to shift under Graham Henry. We tried to shift the whole, have it not just an incremental shift, but a step shift to say the whole leadership structure was changed from the head coach being the sole decision maker. We had a shared leadership style that came in, and part of that was to grow those individual leaders, because we wanted those players to be better fathers, better brothers, better uncles, better mates. And so that if they're nourishing these other pieces of their identity, when if you imagined a bridge, so this bridge was made up of a set of different planks, so you had lots of different planks, so you've got to cross that bridge. So one plank's me as a father, me as a son, me as a brother, me as an uncle, me as a rugby player. So when the plank rugby player one wobbles, you've got these other identities to create strength. But if you only have one, which is a rugby, and when that doesn't go well, then that's quite often when people crash. So we spent hours, days into educating people about, about other aspects of their own identity, and that nourishment tended to release the talent that they were blessed with. And if you only do a small piece of it, you'll only get a small piece of the performance puzzle. But if you develop the whole person, then it just releases the superpowers that these people are blessed with, in my view.
Yeah, absolutely. And You've got an interesting, story yourself. Did you ever dream of, being a part of the All Blacks, one of the most successful sports teams in history? How did you get into that? And I know you've got a funny story in terms of having to initially, when you started working with the All Blacks, fake your position there.
That was more with Canterbury under Wayne Smith, but
Was it?
well, yeah, I had to be taken on board as a masseuse, because one of the directors felt that if they needed someone in the mental skills area, then they were weak and they were soft, and yeah.
What do you think changed during that time? How did it become, seen as critical for the sporting industry as a whole, as well as, the rugby world?
Yeah, look, I think my journey, you asked about, did I ever foresee myself being in this role? Hell no, people who know my background will know that, for the first 12 years of my life, I was in an orphanage. And I believed that the world was made up of normal people and me. I thought I was different. The All Blacks were people from another planet. In any successful sports person, I thought, well, it's no way. And so it wasn't just something I didn't think about. It was something I just didn't believe in. I just thought that was for other people, not me. It was only when I came out of the orphanage and moved into a reasonably challenging home situation with my mother, and so I had to get out of there. Went down to Christchurch and studied physical education, played volleyball, which is a sport I love, and ended up doing reasonably well in that. Ended up teaching physical education at a high school in Christchurch called Hill Morton High School. Terrific kids, awesome staff. And on that staff was a woman called Lee Gibbs. She was coaching Canterbury netball. And so we had conversations. I was at that stage playing for my country. She was also playing and coaching. We both met with the same desire, and that was, how do we get the teams and the people we work with better? That took me to the mind, and that was the most untapped domain, or the last frontier. And then one day, a person walked through the door selling sports equipment to physical education staff, and that was Wayne Smith. And he was an All Black at the time, and so we ended up having conversations, and I ended up working with Wayne when he was an All Black, and then when he became a coach, and Lee were both ahead of their times. They saw the value, understood the value, and propelled the value ahead of the rest of the fraternity. Had to catch up to their own reality, which had its own pain for them. But and from that day, I just grabbed hold of Wayne's shirt tails, and wherever he went, he took me. And that took me from there to Canterbury, to the Canterbury Sevens, to New Zealand Sevens, to Crusaders, then ultimately the All Blacks when he started in 2000, and had the privilege of being there ever since. And throughout that time, coaches have begun to understand the role of the mental area in the whole performance equation, and now it pretty well sits alongside the other disciplines as being a key and core influence in the overall performance of individuals and teams.
Wow. What a great story. Who would have thought? You don't know where life takes you sometimes, do you?
Exactly.
And on the topic of mental health, that's obviously interrelated to one's performance as well. We've got very high, rates of that here in New Zealand, but with any type of elite, professional sportsman, it does tend to be a challenge for a lot of people. Have we seen much changes in people being able to speak up about potential problems that they may have? And how do you guys, support a team around people that may be experiencing those type of challenges?
Yeah, look, huge changes, Catherine. And a lot of it's to do with the environment, and the environment's created by the leader, because if it's not right at the top, it's unwinnable down below. So they set the tone, and the climate, if you can call it that, of any room is normally impacted by when the leader walks into it and how the people react. So in the early days, all sorts of mental health issues were suppressed. They were pushed underground. They were again viewed as a sign of weakness. And so they reared their ugly head when people let themselves go, where they had court sessions or other things like that, where people would just explode. Nowadays, the environments have changed considerably. Vulnerability, being vulnerable is the new strong. So once that's encouraged by the leaders and shown by the leaders, so how do you get people to be vulnerable? Be vulnerable yourself. And if you're consistent in that particular space, then you're giving people permission to say that they're not sure, that to say that they're scared, to say that they're having challenges coping, and rather than seeing that as a weakness, is opening them up as opportunities to assist people to navigate their way through those particular things. Like human beings aren't born with remote controls where you can actually turn it on. You know, you have to have the leaders who basically can be the example and make sure that they can create the opportunities, both open and closed, for people to share the inevitable vulnerabilities. Because part of being human is you know, the longer I've been in this game, you know, Steve and I joke a bit, and so did Ted. Like, you know, both of them would quite often say to me, "Where are we going with this, Bert?" And I'd say, "I don't know, but I know we're heading in the right direction." And sometimes I'd just go into his room, so I don't know what to do, mate. You know, I said, this has happened and I'm unsure. And there'll be times where he'd come into mine, or we'd go into the skippers and say, this has happened, just not sure, you know. And so once it's embraced as not a sign of weakness, but a sign of strength, then you create strands of support for people to hold on to as they journey this very uncertain and unpredictable path that is the sporting arena.
Yeah, I think it is very important to be able to create that space, as you say, that safe environment for people to be able to, you know, be vulnerable. Because, you know, a lot of the times you look at something like the All Blacks, again, very, you know, once a warrior type of mentality, and you've got to get out there and just be this, you know, strong fighting force. At the end of the day, as you say, we're all humans, you know, and we've got to be able to have these, you know, open and honest conversations to be able to advance the team forward.
I think it's a good point, Catherine, but I think that there is one thing to put that against. It's like a lot of environments, when people are having conversations, they're sort of saying things like, "I'm just being honest," you know, and "I'm just telling you what you need to hear." But I think the caveat on all that is to understand that, yep, we want you to be yourself, but you have to be yourself with skill. And too often people give honest information, but they give it the wrong way and at the wrong time.
Yes.
So part of the art of the leadership in these areas is understanding that when you have got information that, you know, that is the truth, that you've got to be very skillful on how you share it. And that's why you know, when you look at a lot of values that teams have, and they have honesty and all those sort of things there, I probably prefer the phrase "doing the right thing," because sometimes giving people the direct honesty at a certain time and is not right for them. It's more damaging. So be yourself with skill is a huge tool for anyone in a leadership position.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I have to ask, because I know a lot of people want to hear this, and you'll either be the most loved or the most hated person for answering this. The dreaded man cold. How bad is that when it actually hits the All Blacks camp? Is it as bad off the field as it is on the field?
Wow, the man cold. Well, you know, like, it's kind of interesting seeing everybody being manic about hand washing and all that. Our doctor, he was years ahead of his time, because we've been hit by a few viruses on various stages which have impacted the performance. Man cold.
How do you support each other on the field with a bunch of men and no women around?
Straight into isolation. Don't be a soft cock, you know, just get up and harden up.
That's great. There's going to be a lot of females that will be taking your advice here. That's great.
Oh, yeah, I don't know about that, but you know, some of us males at times can over dramatise things and think that something as small as that is bigger than being her. So yeah. I can understand the position where people are coming from.
Oh, that's great. Well, Gilbert, thank you so much. It's been so insightful speaking with you, and just, you know, so much wisdom that you've got there and so much experience. And I just love how there's just such simple tools. And I know you're all about the simplicity working in such complex and stressful situations as what the All Blacks face every time they go out in their training and also in competition. And being able to just have those resources and those tools that are simple and that they can apply, obviously on the field and off the field as well. So, you know, I think there's so much that we can all learn there, whether just in our own personal lives or, you know, in business sense or whatever the case may be. So
you're welcome. Thank you very much, Catherine. And good luck to everybody out there.
Thank you, and good luck to the All Blacks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.